Hello and welcome to another episode of Latitude. And in this episode, we are looking at Pakistan's economic plight and is there a way out for Pakistan other than waiting constantly for bailouts from its friends and sponsors over the last several decades, which has become a habit in Pakistan. And that's why the mess, by some accounts at least, in the Pakistan economy. We have with us two very well-informed experts on Pakistan. We have Ambassador Vivek Karchu, who actually needs very little introduction to people who watch him on television with admiration, who read his writings in newspapers, but he also comes with a lot of experience as having been our ambassador in Kabul and keen Pakistan watcher also from his various positions in the Ministry of External Affairs, having retired as secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs. And we have Dr. Shalini Chawla, who is the author of 7 books, as she just tells me, 3 of which are focused on Pakistan-centric issues. And she is also a distinguished fellow at the Center for Air Power Studies. And we will be looking at her insights on the Pakistani military, which hogs up bulk of Pakistan's military and non-military spending under various heads. So, Ambassador Karchu, sir, my first question, which is a pretty obvious one, to what extent is the current financial crisis an outcome of recent mismanagement in Pakistan, as some people who are critics of either Imran Khan or his predecessors want to show, or is it become now a very clear indicator that Pakistan has serious structural problems because there are no taxes apparently that are collected in the country, but the country needs not just this IMF shot in the arm, which is of, I believe, $1.9 billion plus minus, but it needs about $30 billion a year to survive. Now, where is that money going to come from?
Maroof, I think the real issue lies in Pakistan's structures. It is not a case of a mismanagement of the economy. The recurring crises in the macroeconomic situation in Pakistan is a product of the very nature of the Pakistani economy, society, and politics. There are several factors. One, it is a country which lives beyond its means. 2, the military hogs a lot of revenues. But there is another aspect, and that aspect is that the informal economy of Pakistan is a thriving economy. Now, informal economies cannot create a trajectory in the economic situation which rises sharply upwards or which creates industrialization and therefore is a sure route for prosperity. But the Pakistanis, the present floods or the floods that took place last year were really, as someone said, were biblical proportions. But that apart, the Pakistani economy at a low level can continue. Their problem is that critical imports of fuel, of fertilizers, even of food grains, and finally of military hardware requires, the formal economy requires holdings. And if the holdings of the Pakistan State Bank, which is the Reserve Bank, is depleted to just 3 weeks of informal imports, then they face a serious problem. And the only one who has bailed them out in the past are the Americans through the Bretton Woods institutions or their traditional donor friends in the Peninsular Arab states. The Chinese have been very, very careful. So I'll sum up by saying that Pakistan can continue to be on a economic ventilator. But if it needs to really improve its situation,
Okay.
then it has to change its very
Yes,
structure.
we'll just come to that, sir. We'll just come. Thank you very much. I think you touched on them or point out towards them because as Aisha Siddiqa points out in her book, Military INC, they are unaudited. They cannot be questioned. And even now, if you really look at the formal admission of how much goes on military and its allied agencies, there's something like 51, 52% of the allocation. But I remember Hussain Haqqani once telling me that you're looking at 72% of the allocation that goes towards military-centric activities. So what's the way out?
I mean, that has been definitely a very big issue in this whole economic crisis that we see Pakistan landing today. So one is what Ambassador Kajju talked about, the structure. So there has been a bottom line issue of defining the priorities of the state in a very different manner. It is not a normal state because the priorities are very different. It is about catering, creating the threat perceptions, highlighting them, and then catering to it. And that's where this whole mill bus comes into picture. So yes, you are absolutely right that the budget figures which are outlined are not so big when you look at them. But the military expenditure, the actual military expenditure is much more than what officially comes out. And till today, we don't have any categories given in the defense budget of Pakistan. And what I did this whole study on the defense spending, and I also figured out that the acquisition of the major equipment is not part of their defense budget.
Yes.
So that's a major thing. And when large number of equipment comes from China, which is not from the budget, but it is like issued on long-term loans, easy repayment loans. So that is one part of its building. Then they have this, you have a country with less than $3 billion of foreign exchange reserves, but it's the fastest growing nuclear arsenal. If you see the trajectory in the last 5 years, their debt has gone up significantly every year, or every 5 years, we have seen that the debt has kind of doubled there. But the military modernization hasn't paused at any form. Also, there was a study which came out recently from a famous economist in Pakistan, which said that, the political, military, industrialist, and the landed elites, they consume subsidies close to 8% of the GDP, which is a large figure. And that's why IMF is, amongst all the conditionalities which IMF has given, one condition which it has also asked Pakistan to fulfill is that they need to reveal the personal assets of all the government officials above 17 grade and their family members. So this is
in fact, I'll just add a point to your point, and that is that, Pakistan has received, interestingly, from 1950 onwards, close to $100 billion in handouts from its patron, the United States. And they were in two parts up till 2011 or so. And then in the next part, which was $33 billion in the war on terror. So clearly, they've got used to being bailed out because of their geostrategic location and leveraging that to get money. But we'll come back after a break, since we're running out of time, to look at what all is the way forward that we can talk about, and is this something that India should watch more carefully? But that after break. Welcome back. We continue to have our two experts on Pakistan with us, and we're looking at the state of the Pakistani economy and what's the way forward. Ambassador Kajju, sir, it is said that Pakistan has been spending so much on sponsoring terror and terrorist groups that the money that could have gone for developmental activities goes towards propping them up. But the problem is, if you cut down on their spending now, they might become an even greater threat to the Pakistani state than they have continued to be, at least in the last year or plus. Your views, sir.
Maroof, I obviously feel that the Pakistani state budgets will never show you the amount of money that is being spent on the terrorist infrastructure. In fact, I've always felt that the Pakistani agencies are involved in narcotics, and that part of the expenditure of propping up the terrorist infrastructure comes from that sources, apart from the fact that the groups themselves are not averse to criminal activities to raise funds. They also get funds from the devout. So that's not the real issue. The real issue is that how will the Pakistan state acquire a structural change which will enable it to come on a sound footing. And this is what the IMF is pressing them, and the donors are getting impatient. They are telling the Pakistanis, you can't continue like this. So, and one last point, and that is relevant, that the Pakistanis are saying that, look, we can't change overnight, give us more time. And the subtext is that we are a state with nuclear weapons, and you can't allow us to go to Somalia or the Afghanistan way. That is the blackmail.
Yes, I know. They've been using that. And I've often argued on China's east lies North Korea, on China's southwest lies Pakistan. And they both use nuclear blackmail from time to time. And China has made them both into nuclear weapon state, as we know with our whatever findings are available. So, Dr. Chawla, I want to understand another issue, and that is that Pakistan's economy has been rated or said to be a rentier economy, which means you rent out your geostrategic position and get money out of that, as I just brought out, that you make money by handouts, aid, and whatever there is. But there is another problem, and that is the problem that Pakistan's go-to friends have got exhausted with Pakistan. And I'm not talking just America and the Gulf states, but even China is not giving in easily at this point of time. So what do you see happening? It has been said that Pakistan is quietly selling some military equipment in Ukraine to make money on the side. Is that true?
I mean, that those reports are there, which we don't know how true it is, but given the nature of the state, you tend to kind of believe those kind of reports. Is very capable of indulging into activities like that. But then the question is, how much money can they get from that? That's not going to be enough. At the end of the day, they need the IMF package for sure, because the IMF bailout will open doors for other donors, for World Bank, ADBD, even Saudi Arabia, UAE. So that is why the IMF loan becomes very important for them. And right now, I think this will, again, even if they get the IMF loan, it's going to be just a breather for, say, 6 months. So actually what Pakistan needs is a debt waiver, maybe from China, but China is not doing it. So one is obviously, I'm sure China would also want the IMF to support Pakistan because that is good for Pakistan. Secondly, giving money will again bring them to the same, point where they have now got the money without any structural changing, without addressing the problem. So none of the donors we see are kind of coming forward to the extent which will actually change the debt dynamics in Pakistan. So that's not happening. So I think what IMF doing is absolutely, there has been a breach of trust between IMF and Pakistan, and that's why we see this very harsh and the right stiff positioning from IMF, where it is very, demanding on the conditionalities because the previous commitments were not fulfilled by Pakistan. So the way out is the structural changes, and maybe this is the time when the international community can actually talk about a basic change in Pakistan in exchange of that debt waiver or the actual support which would stabilize the economy in some form.
Okay, so Pakistan is actually engaging for a $1.9 billion bailout of the $6+1 billion package that was agreed in Imran Khan's time. And even that is not coming their way. So you can imagine what their net worth is, negligible. But Pakistan is doing what a rogue state does, is leveraging its nuclear weapon arsenal. I would even argue that the money they get repeatedly from Gulf states as a handout could be a price that they are being paid by their friends in the Gulf to keep nuclear weapons stocked up for them if things go from bad to worse with Iran and Pakistan becomes the supplier of the leverage that the Gulf needs against their existential rival, as they see now, in Iran. But Ambassador Kaju, sir, the one rival that has obsessed them and their military all along is India. And I was reading a very interesting piece, and it kind of played up into what I had thought all along, that, when economies go into a tailspin, powerful militaries use the military threat argument to suddenly divert people's attention and get the world to pay them to calm off. And do you see that a possibility between Pakistan raising the ante against India and telling China, we are doing this for you, distracting India so that China can do what it wants in Tawang or Ladakh or wherever, and simultaneously using its military focus to get back at its proteges in the Taliban and tell the Americans, we are doing it for you. So there's a lot of money that could come their way.
Look, I think you make a plausible case, except that I don't think the Chinese would like to rely on Pakistan in any fashion. It will show their weakness. The Americans do not need the Pakistanis at the moment because they have pocketed their strategic defeat in Afghanistan and have moved on. The real issue is their possession of nuclear weapons. And that is something, it is entirely possible, about the scenario you painted vis-a-vis the Gulf states and nuclear weapons and the Iranian issue. But more than that, I think today the world is telling Pakistan, hey guys, move on. And my final point on this, Maroof, is that the sensible Pakistanis, including in the army, know that there is only one way out for the Pakistani economy, and that is through integration with the Indian economy. They've tried everything in the book, including the CPEC, and it simply doesn't work. The only thing is there is this huge market of 1.3 billion people right at their doorstep, and for their ego, their pride, their what permit me, and I'm sorry I'm using the word, their stupid priorities, they simply fail to see it and use it. There are hundreds of ways of dealing with an adversary, even a permanent adversary, and they choose the worst way. They've always chosen the worst way possible.
Okay, right. Last quick question, Dr. Chawla, and that is that would Pakistan resort to friendship with India to try, and that was probably General Javed Bajwa's thesis, I believe, that cut down the threat factor and you cut down on defense spending, or defense spending in Pakistan is so linked to the lifestyles of their generals that there is no hope for Pakistan unless either people pay taxes or the government imposes taxes on the people through higher GSTs and whatever else is being recommended.
So there is a vicious circle that you have in Pakistan, the identity crisis, military lobby, everything is strengthening, each other. So that is difficult to change in my view, in the next 10, 20 years, I don't see it. Your point, which you said about the Bajwa, so-called Bajwa doctrine, where he talked about peace in the neighborhood. I mean, he talked, but we did not see anything coming out. And we have repeatedly seen two positions. We are not ready to talk. And we don't want terror and talks together. And each time the talks issue come up, the reversal of 370 comes from their side. So I don't see a meeting point for talks here. And I don't see that changing because now there are elections at the end of this year. And definitely if the current government talks about talking to India, then you have Imran Khan sitting and then other issues will come out and this will become a major issue about 370 and how we are talking. And we have seen Bilawal Bhutto's statements recently. So I don't see that happening from Pakistan, despite the fact that, that might be most viable option from them. But we need to be cautious about talking to them and engaging with them. That is my view. Because even entering into any kind of, trade with them, the other issues need to stabilize and there need to be some conducive environment before we get into trading partnership with Pakistan.
In fact, there is a point that Ambassador Kaju might probably disagree with me, but studies have shown that the only time the Pakistan economy has taken an upward look is when military dictators have been there because they were not good at fiscal management, but they were good to the questions that are there in the air. Until our next episode, goodbye.